In the small jailhouse at the edge of the square, Mary Beth sat barefoot on the wooden cot, her ankles raw from the rope they'd used when they caught her near the river. The lantern inside flickered low, painting her face in shifting amber and shadow. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her lips were split, but dry. She looked out the single-barred window with the calm of someone who'd already drowned and knew the taste of silence. Outside, a man hammered the final bolt into the gallows. It rang through the cold like a church bell on a funeral morning. "She awake?" came a voice from the hallway. Sheriff Clay Foster stood leaning on the doorframe, his hat in his hands, dust dulling its once black brim. He hadn't shaved in 2 days, and it showed in the way his voice scratched when he spoke again. "She eat anything?" Deputy Clem shook his head. "Didn't touch the bread. Just sat there humming some tune I didn't know." Clay looked in. Mary didn't turn her head. He cleared his throat and walked in anyway, boots slow on the creaking floor. "You got anything you need to say, Mary Beth?" he asked, voice low like a prayer. She looked at him then, really looked, and her eyes were clearer than he expected, green like pine needles in sunlight, even under that bruised eye. "I already said it, Sheriff," she murmured, "when I married him." Clay pressed his lips together. "That ain't a legal marriage. Not in this town. Not under any law I know." She smiled. It wasn't bitter, just tired. "You think paper makes it real?" He didn't answer. Outside, a dog barked and was quickly silenced. The air carried the bite of wood smoke and judgment. "Reverend Doyle says you ought to repent. Says if you beg, they might let you ride out instead of swinging." "I'm not begging." He sighed. "You're 25, Mary. I was also 25 when I married him." "Damn it." He turned, ran a hand down his face. "You know what people are saying. They say you betrayed your own blood, laying down with a savage, bringing shame." She stood, sudden but steady. Her hands were still bound in front of her, the skin at her wrists reddened and worn. But she stood with a stillness that unnerved him. "Shame is lying about love to make cowards feel righteous," she said. He looked at her then, really looked, and it stung him how much she looked like her mother, sweet Josie Beth, who used to leave pies on the schoolhouse steps. And for a moment, Clay didn't see a criminal, just a girl who once ran barefoot through creek water and sang to herself in the evenings. The moment passed. "They're going to hang you at first light," he said quietly. Mary nodded. "I know." He left before she could see the wet in his eyes. The gallows stood at the center of town, beside the dry fountain and across from Gentry's mercantile. Leona Gentry, 60 and sharper than a rattler in a feed sack, had already taken the best seat on her porch. She wore her black church shawl and held a tin cup of something steaming. It wasn't coffee. It was vindication. "She should have been hung last week," she muttered, loud enough for her neighbors to hear. "God don't wait for Sundays." No one corrected her. That was the trouble with towns like Willow Ridge. Truth moved slow, and rumors ran on horseback. Inside the jail, Mary sat back on the cot, closed her eyes. In her mind, she was back by the river, where the reeds whispered and the sky went orange at dusk. She saw Tasunka standing across the water, one hand resting on the hilt of his blade, the other holding out a small carved necklace made from bone and river stone. He had never asked her name. He had waited for her to offer it. "You don't talk much," she had told him once. "I talk when words are worth saying," he'd replied. She had smiled then, a real one, the kind she hadn't smiled since childhood. They met at night, between the silence of the hills. He brought her elk jerky, dried roots. She brought him bandages and soft cotton she stitched herself. When she bled one winter moon, he lit a fire and slept 10 paces away, facing the cold to give her warmth. And when he asked her to be his wife, he didn't kneel. He didn't use words. He took her hand, placed the necklace on her palm, and bowed his head. She wore it still, under her dress. The town had stripped her of everything, but not that. Not yet. Eli Cobb came by late. The barkeeper, once wild, now quiet. He carried a folded biscuit in a tin and 2 sugar cubes. "They said I can't give you nothing, but—" he slid it under the bars anyway. She opened her eyes. "Alma used to say you sang to her after her babe died," he said softly. She never forgot that. Mary nodded. She was kind to me. You were kind to her. He scratched his neck. Folks don't know what to do with kindness round here. They think it's weak. She smiled faintly. So do most cowards. He chuckled, then sobered. If there's anything I can do, sing something for me tomorrow, she whispered, so I know someone's still got a soul. He blinked, nodded, then left her alone again. Dawn rose slow. The sky blushed, then cooled, then turned pale as milk. The town gathered in that hush before shame sets in, the kind where even children are afraid to speak. Mary was led out by Deputy Clem. Her hair was loose, catching the wind. The crowd didn't jeer. They just stared. Reverend Doyle waited at the gallows, Bible in hand, eyes gleaming like he was welcoming a saint into fire. Clay stood at the lever, hand twitching. She climbed each step without looking back. In the trees beyond the town's edge, something moved. But no one saw it yet. The noose swung gently in the wind like a cradle. The Reverend cleared his throat. This is a righteous act. The Lord cleanses his people. Mary turned her head. Did he tell you that himself? Gasps rippled. Reverend stiffened. The Lord speaks through truth. Then tell the truth, she said. You're not hanging me for love. You're hanging me for disobedience. Clay stepped closer, voice low. Mary, she raised her chin. My husband isn't here. But if he was, he wouldn't beg you. He'd forgive you. Someone in the crowd whispered, savage girls gone mad. But others said nothing, because something in her voice rang true. As the rope was placed around her neck, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Sheriff Clay looked once toward the tree line. He thought, just for a second, he saw movement, a flicker of horsehide, a painted face. But when he looked again, it was gone. Mary closed her eyes. In her mind, she was by the river again, wrapped into Sunka's arms. She whispered something to the earth, and the breeze caught it like a promise. And somewhere beyond the trees, a blade was being drawn. And somewhere closer, a man decided not to look away this time. The first time Mary saw him, he was a shadow between trees, half wrapped in dusk and silence. She'd been walking a ridge above the river, carrying a basket of herbs and a knife dulled from use. Her boots had holes at the soles, and her mind was elsewhere, on her father's temper, the cough that clung to her mother like a debt unpaid, and the strange quiet in town after the war ended. She paused only because the woods paused first. The wind stilled, the birds ceased, and in the hush she saw him, standing still as stone beneath a cottonwood, watching her. A man of lean muscle and carved cheekbones, his long black hair tied back with a leather cord, his chest bare under a fringed buckskin vest. His face was unreadable, not hostile, not curious, just aware. She had stared for too long. He had not looked away. Then he did something that surprised her more than anything else. He turned, slow and deliberate, and walked away without a sound, like the land had swallowed him whole. That night, she didn't tell her father. He wouldn't have believed her. Or worse, he'd have believed her and taken his rifle into the woods, drunk and wrathful. Her mother, pale and sunken from illness, would have simply closed her eyes and said nothing. But Mary had dreamed of the man under the cottonwood, not as danger, but as quiet, as stillness, as something unmoved by the town's noise. Weeks passed before she saw him again. This time, she had wandered closer to the river, barefoot, humming to herself out of habit. It was spring, and the world was thawing. She was not. He stepped out from behind a sycamore without ceremony. She did not flinch. He held something in his palm, a length of river grass twisted into the shape of a bird. He offered it to her. She didn't speak, only took it, and nodded once. After that, the meetings became rhythm, not arranged, just happened, like two ghosts drawn to the same place at the same hour. Sometimes he brought her dried meat, sometimes nothing. Sometimes she brought thread or berries. They shared the silence more than words. It was weeks before she learned his name. Tasunka, he said one day, breaking the long hush between them. She repeated it once, careful with the shape of it. What does it mean? He looked out toward the hills. Horse. She smiled faintly. Then I reckon I've been dreaming of a wild horse all this time. He turned his head just slightly. Not wild, just watchful. That night, she hid the bird-shaped knot of river grass inside a jar and buried it beneath her floorboards. By summer, she could tell his footsteps from others. He walked with the weight of memory, not pride. His left shoulder bore a thin scar that looked like a river forked. Once, she had touched it without asking, and he had closed his eyes but said nothing. Later, he carved her a comb from bone and left it on a stone near the water. He didn't speak of his past, but it lingered in him like smoke on cloves. She sensed loss. She sensed war. She never asked, and he never offered. The town spoke louder than it listened, and it never whispered anything kind. They called her odd when she began wearing her mother's old shawl again, green with faded roses. They said she was spending too much time outside. They wondered if she was still mourning her brother, lost to the war. They did not ask her. They assumed her grief and moved on. One evening, Tasunka brought her a necklace, braided leather, and a bead shaped like a small eye. He held it out, and when she hesitated, he gently placed it around her neck. "What's it for?" she asked. "So you're seen." She touched it. "I already feel seen. When you look at me." He didn't reply, but she felt the warmth of it for hours. Their love was not declared. It was built from glances held a breath too long, hands brushing accidentally, and sitting beside one another without speaking for entire sunsets. In the fall, she asked him, "What does marriage look like in your way?" He drew a symbol in the dirt with a stick, two shapes facing, two lines joined, and said, "No priest, no promise to a book, just a joining." She thought for a long time. "I want that," she said. He only nodded, but there was something reverent in it. They married beneath the cottonwood by the river. There was no audience, no gown. She wore a calico dress and flowers in her hair. He tied a red ribbon to her wrist and one to his, then knotted them together. They lay beside the river that night, watching stars between branches. And for a moment, the world was quiet. But silence never lasts in a place built on noise. Mrs. Leona Gentry saw Mary returning from the hills one morning with leaves braided in her hair. She asked questions no one invited. Then she followed her. And what she saw, she did not understand. But she did not need to. Understanding had never been a requirement for condemnation. Leona told the Reverend told the men, and the men told the sheriff. The next time Mary met Tasunka, she wept in his arms and told him they knew. "Then we leave," he said simply. "I can't," she whispered. "My mother." He didn't ask her to choose. He only squeezed her hand. But 2 nights later, Mary returned to town to find her mother coughing blood. Her father was drunk, loud, furious. She tried to run, but he dragged her by the wrist into the parlor. He shouted about shame, about sin, about laying with a red devil. The sheriff came at dawn. He didn't meet her eyes when he chained her wrists. Her mother watched from the porch, eyes dull, mouth open but silent. They threw her into jail and locked her away. No trial, just prayer. Reverend Doyle stood over her cell and said, "You betrayed your people." "I didn't know I had a people," she murmured. "I thought I had a heart." Eli brought her bread. She didn't eat it. The rope waited. Days passed. The sheriff came once, sat beside her, hat in his hands. "You could have married a man from here," he said. "Someone proper." She looked at him with something beyond anger. "You mean someone silent? Someone white?" He didn't answer. "Why were you here, Clay?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. Later, the Reverend held Sunday service and declared her a warning. God sends fire before mercy. Mary sat alone in the dark, rubbing the frayed end of the red ribbon she still wore hidden under her sleeve. She remembered Tasunka's quiet breath on her neck, his hand brushing her hair back, so gently she barely felt it. She wondered where he was, if he was watching, if he would come. She hoped he wouldn't. She hoped he would. Her heart broke either way. They moved her to a second cell as the gallows were built. A girl named Ellie from town snuck in once, left her a folded letter. "You were kind to my sister. I'm sorry." Mary smiled and cried at the same time. On the last night before her hanging, a storm rolled in. The wind rattled the windows and howled like an old wound reopened. in the woods beyond town, Tasunka crouched by a fireless camp. The bone necklace she once wore now hung from his own wrist, wrapped tight. His eyes were dry, his face unreadable. Beside him sat an elder, saying nothing, only watching. Tasunka stood at dawn, painted his face in lines of black and ash. He whispered something to the earth. The fire was lit, not in flames, in purpose, in the decision to return to a place that had once mocked his people, in the choice to walk toward gallows instead of away, in the vow not to save her with blood, but with presence. He did not ride with fury. He rode with mourning, because love, true love, does not thunder. It does not demand. It simply comes, when it's needed most, and when no one expects it. Just before the sun breached the horizon, Mary opened her eyes in her cell. She did not cry. She did not pray. She just whispered one word, and somewhere in the trees, he heard it. The gallows stood like a wound that wouldn't scab over, tall, dry, and too perfectly built. Its pine boards were still pale, not yet darkened by weather or time. It stood in the middle of the town square, where children once played marbles, where Mary Beth had once passed out ribbons on church days. Now, the same square held a platform of death, and the town acted like it had been there forever. No one said her name that morning, not out loud. People gathered with eyes downcast, lips pressed tight. Leona Gentry sat on her porch in her high-collared morning black, hands gloved despite the warmth. She didn't blink much, just stared at the rope as if it owed her something personal. She'd lit the fire with whispers, and now the town burned in quiet ceremony. Reverend Doyle wore his finest Sunday suit, gray wool with silver buttons, and a starch to his collar so sharp it could cut a lie in half. But he wasn't speaking yet. Not until the body swung. Not until the shame was finished dressing itself in righteousness. Clay Foster stood near the steps of the platform, arms crossed, jaw stiff. The sheriff hadn't slept. He hadn't spoken much either. Only to Eli, who had offered him a flask that morning. Clay had refused it, then walked alone down to the edge of the tree line and stared into the woods like a man waiting on thunder. He hadn't seen her yet. Mary waited in the cell, fingers wrapped around the ends of the red ribbon Tasunka once tied to her wrist. It had frayed badly. She ran it over her thumb like prayer beads, slow, steady. Her breathing was calm. She didn't ask the deputy what time it was. She already knew. When they came for her, she stood before they asked. She wore no shoes, no shawl, just a faded calico dress and the bone necklace hidden under her collar. Her hair was braided, loose at the ends. She had done it herself before dawn, humming under her breath while the jail slept. Deputy Clem didn't meet her eyes as he opened the door. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I'll go." He nodded. He wasn't cruel, just hollowed out by duty. The walk from jail to gallows was 10 steps longer than it needed to be. The town had laid gravel down the middle of the street years ago, but weeds grew between the stones now, stubborn and green. As Mary passed the townsfolk, she looked no one in the eye, not out of shame. She simply didn't care for their faces anymore. They looked like paper dolls, small, neat, and scared of water. At the platform, she paused. Sheriff Clay stepped forward, cleared his throat, but said nothing. He held the rope in his hands like a man gripping his own regrets. She looked at him once. "You don't have to," he said, so soft it could have been the wind. She shook her head. "You already did." She climbed the steps with steady feet. The sun had just breached the hills, casting golden light over the town. The light made her look taller, cleaner, like someone out of place entirely. Reverend Doyle opened his Bible and began reading aloud. He didn't ask for silence. He didn't need to. The silence came on its own. "The wages of sin is death," he intoned, voice rising over the stillness. "But the gift of God is eternal life." She already chose life, Eli said from the back of the crowd. The Reverend paused, then continued louder, "Through Jesus Christ our Lord." Mary stepped to the center of the platform. The rope was lowered. The town watched. She looked out at them, this place that had once been home. She saw the window where she used to wave at her brother, the well where she dropped a coin and wished to be seen, the store where she had bought red thread, to mend her mother's shawl. And still, no one said her name. The rope was placed around her neck. It smelled of sweat and rain. Her fingers twitched once, then stilled. Reverend Doyle closed his Bible. Sheriff Clay stepped toward the lever. Then came the smallest sound. Not thunder, not hooves. A bird call. Sharp, sudden, piercing. And then another. From the trees, 2 hawks rose, circling low over the gallows, crying out like mourners who'd arrived too late. The wind shifted. Dust swirled. The sky darkened just slightly. Clay hesitated. "What are you waiting for?" Leona Gentry called out, her voice tight with need. "I'm waiting for the truth to come," Mary said, loud enough for all to hear. People turned toward her now. Faces stiffened. A few eyes watered, but none dared blink. Mary looked at Clay. "He's out there. You know it." Clay's lips barely moved. "They'll kill him if he comes." She nodded. "But he will come. He's one man. He's not." The wind rose again. In the trees, something moved. A flash of color not belonging to the forest. Painted red and black. A shape on horseback. Another. Then a third. The Reverend raised his hand. "This is a lawful execution. We do not yield to heathens." No one moved. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. Slow at first. Steady. Not an army. Not a charge. Just one rider entering the clearing, painted in ash and earth, his long braid tied with a white feather. Tasunka. He wore the bone comb Mary had carved into his hair. His chest was bare save for a leather strap across his shoulder. He held no weapon, just a red cloth in one hand, fluttering in the wind. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eli stepped back. He came alone. Clay looked down at the lever. His fingers didn't move. Reverend Doyle shouted, "Stop him. This is not his land." Mary's voice cut through it like a knife. "It was never ours to take." Tasunka rode until he was at the base of the platform. He dismounted slow, his eyes never leaving hers. He climbed the steps without being stopped, without being spoken to, as if he belonged more than anyone else. He reached the rope, reached her. Her breath caught, but not from fear. He raised the red cloth and tied it over the rope where it touched her skin. Then he looked at Clay and said, in a voice low and carved from stone, "You've judged her. Now judge me." Clay's eyes burned. "You didn't come to kill," he said. "I came to carry her." For a long moment, the town didn't breathe. Then, one by one, the townsfolk stepped back, not out of permission, but shame. Mary looked out over them all. "You think love is weakness," she said, "but you kneel to your fear like it's holy." She reached up, untied the rope herself, and let it fall to the platform with a thud. Tasunka took her hand. She didn't weep. Neither did he. They descended the stairs as if from a church altar. And still, no one said her name. But they watched. And that was enough for now. Behind them, the gallows stood untouched. But it looked smaller than it had an hour before. And in the distance, more shadows moved at the tree line. Not an army. Just witnesses. The rope swung gently in the morning wind. But this time, it held nothing. The air held its breath. The rope still swung slightly, though Mary no longer stood in it. The gallows platform creaked under weight that had lifted but left behind something heavier than the hanging ever could. Shame hung thicker than the dust. Shame not hers, but the town's, coiled around their throats like a ghost rope they could not cut loose. No one spoke. No one moved. Tasunka stood beside Mary at the foot of the gallows, the red cloth still wrapped around the rope, like a wound bandaged mid-bleed. His chest rose and fell with the slow steadiness of a man who knew he had entered a place that would never forgive him, yet came anyway. His eyes were unreadable, dark, storm-quiet. His left hand rested on the small of Mary's back as if to remind himself she was real, and as if to tell the town she would not be handed over again. Sheriff Clay Foster stared at the two of them, shoulders square, face pale. His fingers twitched at his side, hovering too close to the butt of his revolver. But he didn't draw. Mary turned to him, her voice low but clear. "You said the law was for all people." He nodded once. "I did." "Then tell me now, which people do you mean?" Silence answered. Reverend Doyle stepped forward, trembling with rage, hand clenching the good book like it might leap from his grasp. "You cannot let this stand, Sheriff. This is sedition. A woman freed from her punishment by a savage man. This is a corruption of the order." Tasunka did not look at him. Instead, he looked to the crowd, scanning faces. Some he recognized from raids, years past, faces that once cheered when bodies burned. Others were strangers, but none looked him directly in the eye, except one. Eli Cobb stepped forward slow, with dust clinging to his trousers and shame written deep in the folds of his brow. "What if," he said, "this town ain't as righteous as we like to think?" Leona Gentry rose from her porch like a hawk from a nest, voice like gravel soaked in vinegar. "You'll side with her?" "With him." Eli stared at her, voice low but steady. "I'll side with what I saw." "And what was that, barkeep?" "A woman standing proud, not begging. A man coming alone, not with war but with love." Leona's lips curled, but she said no more. Behind her, the sky shifted, clouds parting just enough to let sunlight pour down onto the square, casting the gallows in full light. It looked stark, unnatural, like a relic from a world dying of its own lies. Tasunka took Mary's hand. She didn't hesitate. She laced her fingers with his. Reverend Doyle stepped forward again. "This is not a ceremony. You are not husband and wife in the eyes of God." Mary faced him, green eyes glinting in the morning sun. "Then maybe your God isn't watching close enough." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "She's gone too far." But no one stopped her as she stepped toward the Reverend, slowly, deliberately. "You taught me guilt," she said. "You taught me how to hide my joy, how to kneel so men could feel tall." He stiffened, nostrils flaring. "But he taught me silence," she went on, "and how to speak when words matter, and how not to run when love requires stillness." She turned back to Tasunka, and though he remained silent, something in his eyes answered, something soft, unspoken, anchoring. Clay cleared his throat. "You plan to stay?" Tasunka looked at him. "Would that matter?" "It would," the sheriff said, voice dry. "Because if you ride out, this town can pretend it never happened. But if you stay, then they'll have to see us," Mary finished. Clay nodded. "Good," she said. "They should." A moment passed. Then another. The wind picked up again, curling around the boots and boards of the square, teasing the rope one last time before it stilled completely. From the edge of the woods, a quiet procession emerged, 3 Apache elders, 2 women, and a boy of no more than 10, walking barefoot across the grass. They moved with the certainty of those who have waited long enough. Tasunka turned to meet them. The tallest elder nodded once, then approached Mary. He spoke words not in English, low and measured. She did not understand them, but she bowed her head. He took her hands, pressed something into her palm, a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. Tasunka whispered, "For the joining." Clay stepped forward again, almost despite himself. "You marrying her here?" In front of them. Tasunka's voice was calm. "They already watched her die. Now they'll watch her live." A hush swept over the crowd as Mary stood before Tasunka, the red ribbon in her hands. She looked at the townsfolk, at their suspicion, their silence, their shifting eyes, and then looked only at him. With steady fingers, she tied the ribbon around his wrist. He tied its twin to hers. There was no pronouncement, no kiss, just a stillness, as though the earth itself paused to honor what had always been. From somewhere in the square, a child clapped, then stopped, frightened. But it was enough. The sound echoed, and the moment broke open like a cracked stone letting in light. Sheriff Clay stepped back. "You ride out before nightfall. I'll not stop you." Mary met his gaze. "We'll ride when we're ready." Leona hissed. "So you'll just let this happen? Let this union poison our soil?" Clay looked at her, weary to the bone. "It's already poisoned, Leona. Has been since we buried justice under manners." Eli chuckled low. "Amen to that." Tasunka reached for Mary's hand again, and together they turned toward the edge of town, where the hills rolled soft and the cottonwoods bowed in the breeze. No one stopped them. The Apache elders walked behind, quiet as the sunrise. The townsfolk stood still, Not clapping, not booing. Just watching. As Mary stepped past the gallows one last time, she paused, reached into the folds of her dress, and with a slow, deliberate movement, pulled the bone necklace from her collar and looped it over the wooden crossbeam. Not a surrender, as remembrance, for what the town tried to erase, for the girl they nearly silenced, for the woman she now was. At the edge of the square, Tasunka helped her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, one arm circling her waist, not possessive, but protective. They didn't look back. Not until the ridge. From there, Mary turned, eyes scanning the place where she'd been born, nearly buried, and reborn again. The wind caught her hair. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. The gallows still stood, but beside it now hung not a rope, but a ribbon of red. The town would never forget, and neither would she. As the riders disappeared into the trees, the last line of sunlight glinted off the ribbon like blood, no longer a symbol of shame, but of what could not be killed. Somewhere in the hills beyond, a hawk called out again, and the sky split with light, and in the dirt road behind them, no one gave chase, because deep down the town knew. They hadn't just watched a rescue. They'd witnessed a reckoning.